It was called the Texas Miracle, and you might remember it from years ago. Welcome back to our second half of Give Me a Break, where we're flashing back to Friday. In this next story, you may remember the Texas Miracle because of Houston school superintendent. Now, if you watched the 60 Minutes program back in 2004, you may remember this story. From January 6, 2004. This is a story about schools, about Houston schools who faked these dropout rates. But the former Houston school superintendent Ryan Page was given credit for school success by making principals and administrators accountable for how well the students did. But once he was elected president, Mr. Bush named Page Secretary of Education, and Houston became a model for the president's No Child Left Behind Education Reform Act. Now, what does it mean? What did that mean back then? Well, as we continue our Flashback Friday, we'll give you the definition of No Child Left Behind. The definition meant the No Child Left Behind Act 2011 was a U.S. Act of Congress that we authorized the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, included talent motivation applying to disadvantaged students. The actual meaning of that was the federal law provides money for extra educational assistance for poor children in return for improvements in their academic success. NCLB is the most recent version of the 1965 Elementary and Secondary Education Act. But it turns out that some of those miraculous claims which Houston made were wrong. It all came to light when one assistant principal took a close look at his school's phenomenally low dropout rates and found they were just too good to be true. That principal's name was Robert Kimball, who was an assistant principal at Shopstown High School on Houston's west side. He claimed that no students, not a single one, have dropped out in the 2001-2002 school year. But that's not what Kimball saw. Most of the 1,700 Shopstown students, underprivileged immigrants, prime candidates were dropping out. There was one student, Janice Francis Gomez. She dropped out of Shopstown in 2001, which was 22 years ago. For an ultimate family reason, she had a baby. The high school reported that Gomez left to get a GED, or equivalent diploma, which doesn't count as a dropout. But Gomez says she never told the school officials anything of the sort. And as I'm watching this, I'm thinking to myself, why can't you just tell the school you're dropping out because you can't take care of it because you got a child? I mean, you can't have babies while you're in school. But in all, from years ago, over 400 kids left Shortstown High School that year for a variety of reasons. School reported zero dropouts. Dozens of students did just that. But they hid the fact by classifying or coding them as leaving for acceptable reasons, transferring to another school, or returning to their native country. But Shortstown High wasn't the only outstanding school. The Houston School District reported a citywide dropout rate of 1.5%. But educators and experts at 60 Minutes checked with put Houston's true dropout rate between 25 and 50%. Those low dropout rates in Houston and all of Texas were one of the accomplishments then former Texas Governor George Bush cited when he campaigned to become the education president. But at that time, Page was running the schools and instituted a policy of holding principals accountable for how well the students did. They worked under one-year contracts, and each year the school district gets set strict goals in areas like dropout rates and test scores. The principals who met those goals got a cash bonus up to $5,000 and other perks. Those who fell short were transferred, demoted, or forced out. But before Kimmel went on 60 Minutes, he took those findings to CBS affiliate KHOU-TV, which first reported the dropout scandal. After that, he went to State Representative Nick Noriega. In Noriega's largest Hispanic, mostly poor district, many kids start high school and never finish. When investigators checked half the city's regular schools, they reviewed the records of nearly 5,500 students who left those schools and checked how the schools explain it. They found that almost 3,000 kids have been, but weren't coded as dropouts. The audit sustained Kimmel's allegations. But 60 Minutes wanted to talk with school officials, but they wouldn't talk on camera. They wouldn't even get a fair shake. But off camera, and they argued that the audit was not right fraud. But the officials urged them to get a better picture by talking on camera to Rob Mulcaster, a Houston businessman. And Rod Page declined a request for an interview, but his spokesman said the dropout controversy broke after Page left Houston to become education secretary. And he said the phony statistics at Sharpstown were the work of a few individuals. But Jay Green said that he found it very hard to believe. But he also points out that Houston dropout problems were worse than its school systems. And Houston also won national acclaim for raising the average scores in state-run achievement test. I'll tell you about that when we return. Don't go away. So if you're just joining us, this is our Flashback Friday here at the show, where we look back at all of our favorite stories, and especially ones I may not talk about. I haven't talked about this one, so you might be asking, you haven't talked about it, so why are you adding the Flashback Friday? Well, it's all about the tests. Those standardized tests. Which led to teacher as a cheater before this, so we'll get to that in a minute. Well, when we left off, we talked about how Houston won national acclaim for raising the average scores on state-run achievement tests, or SATs. Those were given to 10th graders, and principals were judged how well the students did on the test. But at the schools, Kimmel says principals taught addition by subtracting. The average test scores were raised by keeping low-performing kids from taking the test. In some cases, that meant keeping the kids from getting the 10th grade at all. It could be healthy, but this is what he said. When the schools did, when Sharpstown High School did, they said, okay, you can't go to the 10th grade unless you pass all these courses. That's what happened to Perla Arredondo. She passed her courses in 9th grade, but was then told she had to repeat the same grade in the same courses. The counselor said, don't worry about it. No, I'm doing my job. I mean, if you repeat the 10th grade, like if you're going back, like you're repeating the same grade because you failed your courses. Like, I went to summer school 2 times. One back in 2010 and the other back in 2015. One, I don't know why. The second, I failed my U.S. history test. If you retake the test, you get to move on. You get to advance to the grade. That's why we have summer school programs. And this person spent nearly 3 years in 9th grade. She failed an algebra, passed in summer school, and finally was right past the 10th grade and that important test into the 11th. Without that credits to graduate, she dropped out. Worked as a cashier, secretary, and a waitress. But you guys will see that report. I'll put the link in the description. But Secretary Page declined to give a 60 Minutes interview, responding to the question in a speech at Houston just before Christmas 2003. And as for that whistleblower Kimball, school officials have denounced him as incompetent and transferred him to primary school for kindergarten to 2nd grade, where he is the 2nd assistant principal. But here's the thing: after that piece was broadcast, Kimmel filed a whistleblower suit against the Houston School District for retaliating against him. The school board dropped its permit and paid Kimmel $90,000. Kimmel resigned and is now teaching at a local university. A few weeks later, 3 top school board officials, including Superintendent Kay Strickland, resigned their post. State Representative Nick Williams, Major Army Reserves, is now on active duty in Afghanistan. Which brings us, and now with those standardized tests and the schools, which brings us to teacher as a teacher. I may talk about this a few times on the show, but if you forgot it, let me play you guys a portion of that segment. Just a small portion. If you haven't seen the video, I'll probably play you the video. So I'm not going to just go all willy-nilly, just play you guys the whole video and then we'll be done. We still got a lot of things to talk about. So what I'm going to do...
I'm Zoe, and this is Paul.
We're the Bakers. On March 18th.
Whose kids are those? They're all up.
Sorry. What was that on the ground? You may remember this one. This was called Teacher as a Cheater. It was an open secret in school districts all over the country. Great pressures on teachers to get those achievement test scores up. Some states were cash bonuses, and their school prestige, and increased funds for schools. But there was supposed to be great security surrounding achievement tests. Sign out for the test and the student's answer sheet. There it is. So let me play you a portion. Let me play you a portion. By that portion, I mean a portion of one teacher who was accused.
That's a crime in South Carolina. Only one teacher has ever been prosecuted. Nancy Yergin.
You gave them the exact questions and answers.
I simply taught the material, but I used the specific material that was going to be asked in the test. I didn't teach them all about all of the invasions in World War II, knowing that only the Berlin airlift was going to be covered. I just simply dealt with the Berlin airlift.
And the question and the answer.
Yes, exactly the material they would be asked. And I did not give them any of the related material that might confuse them.
You zeroed them in on.
Yes, I did.
Precisely the question.
Yes, I tried
Precisely the answer.
The exact material.
And the same questions were used year after year, correct?
Right. This was, when I gave the test last year, that was the 8th year the same identical test had been used, verbatim.
But let me play you the portion of when she was caught. This Greenville High teacher blew that whistle, so let's play you that portion.
When this Greenville High teacher blew the whistle. She is Catherine Rice. A year ago, she was supervising an achievement test in her homeroom class when she saw one of Nancy Yergin's students pull out a stack of notes.
I glanced at them and realized they were a copy of the test, a handwritten copy of the test with the answers underlined.
Questions?
Questions and answers. 6 pages.
Were you surprised by this?
Yes, I was floored.
I understand that he took the notes that we took in class with him to the test and hoped to use them to help him answer the questions on the test. That was cheating.
And she chuckled, but she knew it was cheating.
Where had he gotten the notes?
Where had he gotten the notes?
From me. Right. The material from me.
Nancy Yergin says she was encouraged by her principal, Linda Ward, who she says told her that when she was a teacher, she had done similar preparation for her students, and that it was important to get those test scores up.
She said to me at that time, she looked at me and she said, "We've got to get more teachers doing what you're doing. They're playing that same game everywhere else and we're just not taking part."
That's not true.
And I'm sorry that an untrue statement like that has been made. I never cheated. I never condoned cheating. I never encouraged cheating. And I never implicitly gave anyone a green light.
Is there pressure on you as principal to get those scores up?
It's the teacher's job. But after she was caught, but Ward offered to let Jurgen resign. But here's the thing: she chose to fight. When we come back, we'll take you to court. We're looking back at all of our stories from the past 5 years of the show, hence the term Flashback Friday. And in this next story, we're focusing on Teacher as a Cheater. I talked about this. If you don't know what I'm talking about, it is where it's not just like teachers copying off this. No, it was just like this. Some teachers were caught correcting and erasing wrong answers, giving copies of the test before test day, a stack of notes, etc. But in this one case from Nancy Jurgen, she was caught and arrested for a breach of test security. Now, this was in court, so let's take you to that courtroom.
Offered to let Jurgen resign. Jurgen chose to fight. It became a public issue. WYFF, a local TV station, covered a public hearing in which a crowd of parents and students rallied to Jurgen's support.
She takes time with us and she really explains everything in detail and she cares about us and she really shows it.
To no avail. She was fired and shortly after was arrested for breach of test security. She took to the airwaves.
Do you think it was bad that your son was given that study sheet ahead of time?
Absolutely not. We love you, Nancy.
Live.
Hang in there.
Thank you. I appreciate your support.
But finally, her nerve gave out and she pleaded guilty and was fined $500. The 90-day jail sentence was suspended, and then the final blow. Her teaching certificate was withdrawn. Nancy Jurgen will never teach again.
I didn't establish the penalties, nor did she, but she certainly knew prior to cheating what the possible consequence was.
But the state accused her of cheating for money. $5,000 in cash bonuses she received over 2 years. She denies it. She was trying to help out the poor kids, the black kids. But Dr. Jacob Cornell, who runs a watchdog group called Friends for Education, has this point to make.
The black at test time is a form of racism.
In fact, what these tests do is hide the great inequality in American education. If you're born poor and black in South Carolina, you're going to stay poor and black all your life because of public schools. When you finish the public schools in South Carolina, you're going to be illiterate.
But before that, it was all in the newspaper, the print media that we're talking about here.
Offers that there's something very fishy in the system is that while South Carolina's elementary and high school achievement scores soar over the national average, the state is at the bottom nationally in college boards and other tests local schools do not control.
I think it's just sheer fraud to tell a student or his parents that he's doing better than he really is.
The effect of this is that it allows poor schools to continue to be poor and escape the eye of public inquiry.
Dr. John Cannell has become something of a legend in the world of education. His watchdog group, called Friends for Education, has been tracking the whole business of achievement testing. He says the public education system is riddled with cheating, that the education establishment, in using test results to show progress, is committing a nationwide scam.
Headline story, front page story, Washington, D.C. students score well on national test. Well, that story is printed by the Chicago Tribune and the San Francisco Chronicle and the Los Angeles Times and even the New York Times. And everywhere, superintendents are able to feed these bogus test scores to the print media. The scores are printed the superintendent gets their raises, and the people of that state are convinced that they're not part of a nation at risk.
Agreed. Now let's get to the point to where we're talking about not the porn black schools. That's a form of racism.
South Carolina, you're going to be illiterate.
Cannell concentrates his anger on achievement testing in the poorest parts of the country. But the corruption of the system seems to be everywhere. The Franklin Avenue School in Los Angeles, one of 68 California schools in which principals and teachers were caught cheating, caught erasing and correcting wrong answers. In Memphis, Tennessee, one teacher confessed that with the principal's complicity, students were given copies of the test before taking it. And teachers have been caught cheating in Texas and Illinois.
Everybody in education knows what's going on. And the State Department of Education is one of the greatest culprits here in this state. They ride those test scores. And they go up and they say, give us more money, hire more people, pay them bigger salaries. It's a racket. And the public's suffering for it. And the taxpayers are hurting, and I guess most of all, the kids are hurting.
Dr. Charlie Williams,
Now here's the superintendent for the Charleston, South Carolina's public schools.
superintendent of South Carolina's Department of Education, dismisses such allegations.
A lot of people may say a lot of things that don't make them accurate. That doesn't make them accurate.
He says the pressures teachers feel to get the scores up have a positive effect.
I think the pressure causes people to teach more effectively. The assumption that's being drawn by you and others is that pressure causes teachers to become cheaters and dishonest people.
I asked, how do you know it's not going on?
Well, first of all, most teachers are sincere about teaching kids rather than making the test scores look good.
People that think that need to come down to the real classroom and see what's going on.
If everybody knows, how come nothing's been done?
It doesn't benefit any school person to do anything about it. Can you think of one, well, I'm not supposed to be asking questions, but can you think of any school officials who benefit from low test scores?
Never mind test scores.
This whole story is
Cannell
from two
feels
questions.
This
So let's
whole
hear from
story can be reduced
Jacob.
to two fundamental questions.
What do your children know, and when do they know it? Because if you don't get an accurate answer to that question, your child is going to join the increasing numbers of young adult illiterates in this country, and it's going to be too late.
And it was too late. Something has to be done. If those tests, I mean, if we're frauding those test scores, our tax dollars are hurting. Especially the case with our last Flashback Friday when we come back. Finally, this flashback. Remember when I told you about Flabluff's plan to remodel the upstairs gym? Well, if you ever remember, let me remodel it for you. This was back in 2020 when they had a board meeting about remodeling the gym because it was a safety issue because of the slant in the grass. They had a discussion about moving the games to the Renowski gym, which was across the street from the varsity gym, which was next to the administration building and next to the central kitchen, to where they had a lot of other gyms. I mean, they had a gym in junior high for the basketball. And the whole reason why teachers were not getting raises was basically because of the fact that they're going to spend over $500,000 rebuilding this thing. And so what it come down to is like, okay, do you want progressive or do you want Barcom? The option was to reject all bids. A lot of people going on and saying, oh, this is a safety issue. Maybe playing basketball and you ain't gonna give me no raise. That's how it was. And so finally, the board came up and said, I vote to remove all bids. All in favor? Alright, and the next day, they took it down. But during that time, I went up there to make sure that I didn't get hurt. And it turns out I did not get hurt. I didn't even go down the middle. Because that's where all the kids, I see kids on the ground, like rolling, running on the ground, and I'm thinking to myself, maybe that's probably a safety issue. And then months later, they went for Progressive's bid, shut the whole thing down. And I was there reporting on this. And after one of those board meetings, I found out that it was over $800,000. You know how much $8,000 it is? How much is $8,000? I mean, $800,000. Sorry. I didn't mean $8,000. I meant $800,000. Here are some things you can buy for $800,000. I mean, 40 t-shirts. You basically bought like 40 t-shirts. You can buy a home for $800,000. They basically bought a house. That was a house they bought. $800,000. And the budget's still over $1 million. And we're raising money. We're raising money and no one cares. Because no one cares. If they care, then figure something out. Cut back. Don't spend a lot of money. Remodeling, that costs money. Try to think about it. Try to think. It's like, oh, we'll spend it. It's not like $500,000, $800,000. That's a lot of money for remodeling. I mean, they still got the stairs completed, but the grass area needs to be done. And at that time, when it gets done, we'll show you. But it wasn't even done in February, but it was March, and they got postponed because of the weather. But we don't know when it will be done. We still don't know. I might even contact Celeste Garcia and ask her about it. And if I do that, I'll give you an update as soon as possible. So look for that. Well, that concludes our Flashback Friday, which is over and completes Give Me a Break for this Friday. Tomorrow on Give Me a Break Saturday, we'll give you the very latest on. We'll give you the captain at the trial about putting Ethan in jail, and then we're also going to talk to you about school threats. We're going to give you one of those school threats before I sign off right now. Actually, we're also going to talk to you about a 3-year-old who brought a loaded gun to school. He didn't shoot. But let's give you one of those threats that happened. 3 middle school 8th graders were charged with hate crime after alleged posts threatened black community. This was in the school. But a sheriff was in the press conference. We're going to give you that on Saturday. That's all for this Give Me a Break Friday going to Saturday. We'll see you again for Give Me a Break Saturday night. For always sure, Give Me a Break and YouTube. Good night. And have a happy Flashback Friday.